Iran's foreign minister says Tehran is determined to defend itself after Israel carried out retaliatory strikes on military targets across Iran. Israel has released video saying that this shows the Air Force preparing for the attack. Now, more than 100 fighter jets took part in the operation. Israel says its attack was in response to Iran's ballistic missile barrage earlier this month. Iran says 4 military personnel were killed in the strikes, but played down the impact of the attack, saying they only caused limited damage. Let's discuss this further with DW's Middle East expert, Shani Rozanes, who joins me here in studio. Hi, Shani. Now, we're talking about the massive operation, 100 military jets. Iran also talking about the right and the obligation to respond. Is Israel risking an outright war by this action?
Well, it could be. Israel hopes that not. It seems like Israel tried to target only military destinations, hoping that Iran will accept, sort of clear rules of engagement where, both parties stick only to military targets, which is also what the Iranians claim to have done in October. And the idea, I think, for Israelis was to embarrass Iran, but not humiliate it, in a sense that it will send a clear message. First of all, Israel can, despite the distance, despite all the hardships, there might be challenges because of the distance to operate. Israel wanted to show that it can do that, but then at the same time, it also did not want to escalate. If it wanted to go full in, they would have gone for maybe oil facilities, probably more targets connected to the nuclear program of Iran. So the choice not to do that, I think, was aiming at, signaling. Also, we heard some reports today that maybe Israel have sent some messages through third parties to Iran that the attack is coming. So Israel was very much trying to sort of get its way in, sort of proving that it can respond, but also keeping the response under, acceptable, hopefully acceptable level of aggression for Iran.
And part of that restraint has obviously come following pressure from the US. We've seen Antony Blinken touring the Middle East and with some of the meetings with Israeli officials as well. But why have we seen this kind of restraint regarding Iran, but not with Lebanon? Well,
you're talking about American pressure. We also know Biden and Netanyahu themselves were speaking in the last weeks, probably also about this. It was very important for the Americans that this does not go out of hand. This is 10 days before the election. And it's really interesting to notice that, indeed, maybe for the first time, there's a great American success in putting pressure on Israel far more than on other fronts that Israel has been battling with in the last year. And that's partially because the sophistication of this operation is such that Israel needs to rely on American backup. Without it, Israel cannot operate there, unlike in Gaza and Lebanon, which are de facto almost Israel's backyard. Israel has been, invading them in and out for decades now, and knows in and out and through how to operate there. They're needed. Their dependency of the American support there is not as strong. And I think also for the Israelis, it was quite clear that in such sensitive timing, 10 days before the American election, doing something that will spite the Americans, the Democrats, but just taking a step that might bring to a wider escalation would be unwise. And therefore, we've seen, American success with leveraging, this position right now at this moment.
And where does that leave the conflict with Hezbollah, with Hamas, the Gaza situation?
It's interesting. It's supposedly 3 different fronts, but it's actually all connected. It's connected because Hezbollah, for example, is a direct proxy of Iran. We know Iran has been prompting it with money, with support, with technologies. And so for Iran, Hezbollah and Lebanon were always supposed to be the front line of attack with Israel. They were supposed to be their insurance plan to avoid direct confrontation with Israel. And this is why we were seeing also Iran in the last week since Israeli strong attacks there, trying to prompt up Hezbollah again, try to help it reconstruct and rebuild. For Iran, this would still be the preferred vehicle of attack when it comes to fighting against Israel. But then also there's a connection in the sense that Hamas and Gaza, they always wished for a greater war. They were hoping when they launched their attack on October in 2023 that there will be a follow-up, the Al-Aqsa flood coming from as many directions as possible and pulling Iran directly into this confrontation. That would have been the best-case scenario. And by toning down that front, by bringing de-escalation, the Israelis hope they will also signal to Gaza, to Hamas, this is not happening. Your wildest dream, this is not going to be fulfilled. This is time for concessions. This is time to bring things to an end in Gaza. And for Israel, it's very clear. It's about the hostages. They want to push Hamas to agree to bring the hostages. And we have to see, this is where the Israeli attention is now. And we'll have to see, we know there's going to be talks in Qatar in the next days. Maybe there's a chance for a breakthrough there.
I was just going to take it back to Israel. What does this mean for Benjamin Netanyahu himself and his entire political campaign?
Indeed, in a way, the last month have been dreamy for him, for a leader, to be able to show such great successes of the military, taking down one by one Israel's arch enemies. That's, of course, a great achievement. And we've been seeing also the polls responding accordingly, Netanyahu building up back some of the support that he lost. However, at the same time, he has very few little aces up his sleeve in the sense that there is nothing else that he can bring Israelis in order to bring that complete victory that he's been promising the whole time. Anything but the hostages won't work. Now he needs to focus his efforts there, and that might require some very painful sacrifices that Netanyahu will have to make. We're not sure he's there yet.
Let's bring in Marina Miron, military analyst at King's College London. Marina, good to have you on the program. Israel says it carried out a limited strike, but it was one of the biggest air attacks the country has conducted in its history. How would you assess what this was?
Good evening. Well, Israel vowed to respond to the Iranian attacks that we have seen at the beginning of this month. So it was expected that Israel would somewhat raise the stakes, but there was a great fear that Israel would go after Iranian oil fields or nuclear facilities, possibly. And so what happened here is that Israel responded in such a way as trying to put an end to this escalatory spiral. And allegedly, Israel has also given some warning not only to the U.S. on Friday night, but also to Iran that this attack would be coming. It was the largest attack, but it was an attack against military sites in the western and southern provinces of Tehran. So essentially, it's showing Tehran that, yes, Israel has the capability, to penetrate Iranian air defenses, and this should be the end of this tit-for-tat exchange. What will happen next remains to be seen, of course, because Iran will certainly want to respond to the strike as not to lose face.
You mentioned the restraint there. This partially due to U.S. pressure to not strike Iran's nuclear facilities or its oil production. Why was this, in particular, a red line for the White House?
Well, the whole fear was that obviously it would have an economic impact on the oil prices because China is, of course, a major player here. China is one of the main buyers of Iranian oil, for instance. But aside from that, it would provoke certainly a greater response from Iran. We have seen that Iran has warned Israel so far of its attacks, with the exception there was a short warning still on the 1st of October attack, and it was limited. However, already that last attack by Iran on Israel has shown that Iranian missiles and drones can penetrate Israeli air defenses. And the fear was what would happen if Iran started targeting population centers instead of military targets. And of course, it's very expensive, and it involves the U.S. into this whole scenario because the U.S. will have to help Israel to defend itself. Now, the Arab states are under pressure from Iran not to allow any sort of support to Israel, not to open their airspace for such operations, for defending Israel, for instance, against an Iranian attack. So it's very complicated, the dynamics, and so there was a fear that that might lead to a greater war.
And we also have the propaganda battle going on as well, with Israel saying that it hit Iran's defenses and now it's opened the door for future operations against Iran. But Tehran also saying that no, its air defenses countered much of the attack. It's played it down. So in such a scenario, how do we know which line we can believe?
probably the middle, because we really don't. There is nobody on the ground to do the assessment of the damage that was done. And certainly Iran will not be interested in releasing how much damage this attack has caused to its military facilities. And the same goes for Israel. Again, when Iran attacked, it was also downplayed. So we will always be caught in this spiral in terms of how much damage each side could do. That being said, some believe that the fact that Iran is now downplaying the damage, it could give it an off-ramp to end this escalatory spiral. I don't think Iran will go down that way, but it will remain to be seen also against the background of the peace talks in Doha concerning the Israeli-Hamas conflict in Gaza, how that will come out. And that might also influence Iranian actions in relation to the strike.
Right, let's get some context from Alex Vatanka. He's a senior fellow and the founding director of the Iran program at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. Hello and welcome, Alex. Israel says it conducted precise strikes. Iran denies any major damage. What do you think?
Look, I think so far the messaging from Tehran that speaks to, limited damage done by these strikes really speaks to what Iran hopes will come next, which is to say that there won't be another follow-ups, that this is Israel's retaliation. If that is the case, it seems to me, listening to Iranian officials, that Iran will be happy to sort of wrap this up, this round of tit for tat, if you will. But, obviously we have to wait and see what Israel might do. I mean, the Israelis might consider this as one first wave, more waves to come. I doubt it. I think maybe for Israel too, this is the moment where they're going to step back and say, now they've retaliated. But again, impossible to know till we see what the Israelis might do in the next coming days or so.
Right. What Israel did not do is not target nuclear and oil facilities, which is something the U.S. warned against. Why do you think Israel heeded the U.S. warnings?
I mean, there are so many ways to look at that question, but frankly, I mean, we are in an election cycle. We're just a few weeks away, 2 weeks away, essentially, from the U.S. Presidential election day. And I suspect, and this isn't just a suspicion, this has pretty much been articulated publicly by the Biden administration from the U.S. side to the Israelis, saying, look, don't do anything that would bring about consequences that we in the United States don't like to see. So, for example, a few weeks ago, we were talking about Israel potentially hitting Iran's nuclear facilities, critical energy infrastructure. The United States made very clear early on it wasn't willing to see any of that happening. So what we have instead are the reports about 140 Israeli aircraft, which, if it's true, it's historic. I mean, it's the largest number of Israeli aircraft that I can recall ever in operation in the Middle East in history of the country of Israel. So if it's true that 140 Israeli aircraft took off, and they hit 20 so missile and other military sites in Iran, it's not just a symbolic gesture. Clearly, the Israelis showing to the Iranian side the capacity to strike. And that's exactly what the United States is happy to see, that Israel makes its point. Hopefully, the Iranians will listen to that point, but it doesn't escalate any further.
Right. Some experts believe Iran is trying to avoid an all-out war with Israel. However, Iran said that it, quote, has a duty and right to self-defense against foreign aggressors. In what way, if at all, could Iran respond to these attacks?
What we've seen in the last 7 months in terms of the tit for tat is when the Israelis have taken action against Iran. It began in Damascus when Israel took out Iran's embassy in Damascus, and then the Iranians retaliated with the first round of missiles against Israel. And then you had the killing of Hassan Nasrallah. And then again, Iran retaliated October 1st. So what we've seen in terms of Iranian action are the use of ballistic missiles, to some limited extent drones. Most likely that's all Iran really has in terms of a direct response from the Iranian homeland. I don't think that's what the Iranians want to do. I think the Iranians are hoping we can go back to a situation where this Iranian-Israeli fight, which is an old fight, but that this fight goes back to what it used to be, fought through proxies closer to Israel. Iran definitely does not want to see this war, coming closer to the Iranian homeland. Rather, it wants to see the fighting happen in places like Gaza, perhaps West Bank, and certainly on these days.
Right. This attack on Iran comes after the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken toured the Middle East in an effort to push for a ceasefire. Now, as things stand, there's not been much progress regarding a ceasefire. Why is that?
Look, I mean, I think that really fundamentally goes back to the state of Israel and what it considers to be its national interest. They feel that October's 7th attack of last year by Hamas against Israel changed everything, and that they are right now determined to destroy as many of their enemies in the so-called Iranian-backed axis of resistance as possible. So from Israel's point of view, a ceasefire right now could, in a worst-case scenario, just result in the likes of Hamas and Hezbollah taking a time out to regroup, to reorganize, to come back and carry out more strikes against the Israelis. Now, on the other side, obviously, what U.S. and other Western allies of Israel are telling Israel, and increasingly I think they're maybe being listened to, is that, look, there is no military solution to your problem with the likes of Hamas and Hezbollah. And if you do that, you might be finding yourself alone. And that's a real issue and challenge for Israel, because Israel's biggest, essentially, asset here is that it has the backing of essentially the entire Western world. And without that backing, Israel would be much weaker position. And I think that is going to shape their calculations in terms of, when they should accept that possible ceasefire that the U.S. and Secretary of State Blinken has been pushing for.
Now, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is currently on a bilateral visit to India. After inspecting an Indian Navy vessel earlier today, he addressed Iran directly.
My message to the Iranian government is very clear. This should not go on with further escalatory reactions. It has to come to an end now, so that the way is open for more peaceful developments in the Middle East.
Right. Let's get more from Hans-Jakob Schindler. He's a Middle East security expert and the senior director at the Counter-Extremism Project here in Berlin. Hello, Hans. So, Israel says it conducted precise strikes. Iran denies any significant damage. What do you make of this attack?
Well, as far as we can see and know by now, it was a fairly proportional strike. It exclusively targeted military sites and air defense sites. So no oil facilities, no nuclear program facilities. About 20 targets. Apparently, they were successful. And what really distinguished this strike from the last strike of Israel against Iran, which used only one target and missiles, this was a combination of missiles and airplanes. So Israel demonstrated to Iran that it can strike at will all over the country using fighter jets rather than long-distance missiles. So very proportionate, very precise, but also from an Iranian perspective, concerning attack, because no damage was achieved to any of the Israeli airplanes.
Right. You see, concerning to Iran, it's not yet clear if they are going to respond to these strikes or not. But if they were to do so, what strategies do you think Iran might use?
Well, it's very clear from what the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, but also what the state television says. They are not yet sure whether or not they want to respond to this strike. It would be the final round. They struck twice, Israel struck twice, so they could scale this back. But it's also very clear that they are in the process to losing their most important proxy, i.e. Hezbollah in Lebanon. There is really clearly a military emphasis of the Israeli military now on striking Hezbollah. This is a strategic setback for Iran greater than this attack last night. So the assumption is, if there's going to be some response, using its broken network is going to be the first step. I do not see at the moment, from the rhetoric we hear from Tehran, that they're gearing up for another missile strike on Iran, which always bears the risk that the Israelis and the Americans are going to shoot out all the rockets again out of the sky like last time.
Right. So, weighing all that you've said so far, where does this leave the ongoing conflict between Israel and Iran-backed proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas?
Well, we are still not yet in a phase where we can easily transition to negotiations. Neither side seems to be particularly keen on this. If you look what happens in Lebanon, there is really no movements towards diplomacy. Similar things, although there was great hope, including myself, that the death of Sinwar would really restart negotiations at earnest. The Houthis are still striking international shipping in the Red Sea. So unfortunately, we are still in a conflict era right now. However, hopefully, with this strike, a wider escalation has been prevented because it was very targeted and not to an extent that the Iranian regime should feel forced to respond directly to Israel.
I mean, we keep talking about preventing further escalation, wider escalation, and yet the tit-for-tat continues. So let's wrap up with this. Is there anything that suggests that either Iran or Israel might be trying to either de-escalate or further escalate the situation?
Well, I think in Gaza, we are now long past the point where some kind of a decision about the administration of the Gaza Strip needs to be taken. Otherwise, this is pretty much only a few years and Hamas would be back, unless the Gaza Strip is administered by anyone else but Hamas, but no decision has been made yet. In Lebanon, I expect that the airstrikes are going to continue for quite a while, because it's very clear that Israel wants to set back the military capabilities of Hezbollah and push Hezbollah beyond even the Litani River to make sure that Israelis can come back to the north of Israel, to their homes, where they have not been since the 8th of October, 2023. So we will eventually get to a point where negotiations are possible, but I just don't see that we are there yet.
Right. Hans-Jakob Schindler, Middle East security expert. Thank you.